We didn't grow up knowing what executive function skills were. Life felt overwhelming. Managing time, staying organized, and feeling stuck made everything difficult. What we didn't realize was that we lacked the skills to plan, prioritize, and break goals into manageable steps. After years of trial and error, we've seen how powerful executive function skills can be. With expert interviews, real stories, and practical strategies, this podcast is the resource we wish we had. Whether you're a student, parent, or professional, we're here to help you unlock your potential. Welcome to the Executive Function for All podcast. Today we're joined by Ryan Palm, who leads the Brad McGarry Center for Neurodiversity at Mercyhurst University. Ryan oversees one of the oldest and largest college support programs for neurodivergent students in the country. He helps them transition to college, succeed while they're on campus, and launch careers after graduation. In this episode, we talk about the executive function challenges students face when they get to college, how families can prepare before the first semester, and what it looks like to turn those skills into workplace success. Ryan is someone I've always admired for the work that he does, and this is a must listen for families of neurodivergent students who are considering college. Let's begin. Ryan, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me, Brandon. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, you run one of the biggest neurodiversity college support programs in the country. And I just love what you're up to at Mercyhurst. I've learned a lot about it and it's incredibly cool. So I'd not only like to share about that, but talk about what you see.
Yeah, so we have a great support program for neurodivergent students. I often say we're one of the oldest and the largest in the country, and yet I'm amazed how few people know about it. So I appreciate the chance to tell your listeners a little bit about our program and then kind of what we see. So, we provide support for neurodivergent students who are enrolled at the university seeking a degree just like every other student on our campus. But we see that students who come through our program, they have some challenges, whether that's executive functioning, whether that's social support, whether that's, they know they're going to have some challenges finding that meaningful career after college. And so we try to help meet students where they're at in terms of that level of support. A common element for most, if not all of our students is needing that executive function support. And I think that's where, your work and mine certainly comes together and mirrors each other. So I think there's a few common themes that we see, when we talk about executive functioning at the college level. And many of these are very similar to what you might see in high school, but I think they become exacerbated when you lose some of those supports that exist in the college setting. And the biggest one is just planning in general. I mean, it seems broad and obvious, but it's such a different element for college students compared to what they often have in high school. We work with lots of students who come from support programs at the high school level where, whether it was a support classroom, whether it was their family was heavily involved, maybe they had an executive functioning coach, whatever it might be. And then they often end up in a college setting and you've got your schedule of 4 or 5 classes and figure it out yourself. And that's overwhelming for almost all college students, but particularly those who may have some executive functioning challenges due to an autism diagnosis or ADHD or any number of other, neurodivergent diagnoses. And so that's where we spend a lot of our time, and kind of square one with students is how can we plan your week, your month, your year to, set you in a good position for success going forward.
Yeah. So many people talk about what it's like and how to prepare for college, and you're just like on the front lines, right? So when you plan, like what advice would you give to a family who's thinking about college and the students in high school? Like, do you have any planning advice for them?
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious, but it often comes down to repetition, right? The earlier you can start planning, the better it's going to be, when you make that transition into college. And you can take that same advice and put it into lots of different categories, from laundry to making friends to, schoolwork, all those things. But I think, again, a lot of the students in the high school level, they're told you're going to go here at this time, and then you're going to go there at that time. And then they have this incredibly rigid schedule. And if you're a student athlete, it's even more so. Or if you're in the band, or if you're in a club or organization, all of those things add extra structure, which is great. And we love seeing that. But it also makes it easier for you to know when to go and what to do, right? And when you get to that college point, you have a lot of free time. It's a great thing. But if you don't use that free time effectively, you're going to struggle. And so we talk about that a lot with families. A simple example I often give too is, many students with executive functioning challenges have an IEP or a 504, some type of learning plan, right, during their high school years. Many students are not involved in that plan. They know it exists. They know it kind of, helps feed into what supports they get, but they don't really know much about it. One of the biggest pieces of advice I give families is make sure your student gets involved in that planning process. Even if it's the very last meeting they have their senior year. Earlier the better, obviously, but something is better than nothing, certainly in this scenario. So they're starting to understand what are some of the ways they are supported through that plan. If that's extra time on a test, if that's a distraction-free testing environment, whatever those pieces might be, the more they're understanding those key topics, the easier that transition is going to be when they have to advocate for that for themselves at the college level. That's another one of those big transition points is so much of your high school supports are put in place for you. They're just there. They exist. People remind you to use them. That's not the case in the college level. You have an opportunity to have those and take good advantage of them, but they're not automatically put in place. They're not thrown at you all day, every day, like they might be in the high school setting. So those are just a couple things that come to mind.
I want to come back to the rigid schedule that you talked about, because I think this is such an important point that, you and I are consistently working with college students, and people are, I'm sure you get the question, like, are executive functioning skills getting worse over time? And we've come a long way since, get home before the streetlights come on, where there was a lot of planning and figuring out how to navigate this world, to now it's your teacher's plan for you. And then after school, your coach's plan for you. And you come home and maybe you have 30 minutes. And then you contrast that with the amount of time management that you have to be in charge of yourself when you get to college. I think that's a great point that I wanted to reinforce and bring me to my next question is, I hear a lot about time management challenges. Is there anything besides planning you guys do for those?
Yeah, I think it roots into planning, right? It sort of all comes back to planning. And when you think about your transition from a high school day, which is 7:30 to 3:00 every minute, more or less scheduled, right? And then you have some free time after school. In the college setting, you may have class at 9 a.m. and then 11 a.m. and then you've got the rest of the day to do whatever you want. And, you probably have a lot of homework to do. You got to read, you got to write, you got to do these things. But you should also squeeze in some video gaming if that's your thing. You should go to your club meeting. You should ideally go to the gym or go for a walk, right? All those different pieces are really important. But if you aren't planning your day, that free time, if you will, is going to evaporate very quickly. And then you're going to look and it's going to be 10 p.m. and you're going to say, well, I didn't do anything I was supposed to do today, right? So we often take the strategy of let's literally, take out a piece of paper or an app or whatever a student likes best and plan out what that day looks like. And hopefully we're doing this early in their time, on campus by your, second semester, your freshman year into your sophomore year. We hope you've built those skills to be able to plan your days accordingly. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we need, a little more support, but you've got to figure out, all right, what's important to me as a student? Is it movement? Is it gaming? Is it the club I want to join? Are you somebody that really needs naps, right? Some students just need a nap or they need some type of, self-reflection time. What are all those things that fit into helping you be your best self? And there's a lot of components that can go in there, but let's figure out what those are and figure out how do they work into your week. You may not be able to get to the gym 5 days a week. It just may not work out that way with your work study schedule or all the other things you have going on. But if it's a priority for you, then let's figure out how to make it happen as often as we can. And, there's the saying that what gets measured matters, or, you only measure things that matter, right? And I think it applies in the planning world too. The things that matter need to go into the plan. And if they don't, then you're less likely to get them done. And so it all comes back to that key planning piece and being able to communicate what matters to you as a student and how can we get that into your plan.
Yeah. And I love how you started with not just school, because that's one of the core mistakes that I see is everyone's like, okay, we just got to hammer down school and then there's nothing to work towards, right? Whether it's video games, friends, or whatever. So I think that's a great method. Just to normalize this for some families, if you're planning with a student for the first time, what is that like? I know every student's different, but do they struggle with it?
Yeah, a lot of them do. And we have in our program, we've got a great mix of students that come from all different types of backgrounds. Some have done a lot of planning activities, some have done zero. So it sort of depends where that student's at, kind of where we start. But sometimes I think it is as simple as taking a grid of, every hour of the day of the week and start plopping things in there, right? So let's put your class in there, right? Do you eat lunch every day? You do. Let's put that in there, right? Let's put dinner in there. What else is really important to you? Is it the gym? Is it a walk? Is it a nap? Is it, I like to play video games with my friends online at 7 p.m. every night. Okay, well, let's put that in there, right? And then see what's left. And I think one of the big adjustments for students is figuring out, yeah, I go to history class for an hour, but it might take me 2 hours to do the reading that I have for that class each and every day, right? There's that's one of the big changes in from high school to college is the out of class work expectation, right? There's, a variety of numbers, but oftentimes the number is somewhere between 3 and 5 hours a week for each class session that you have. You go to history class for an hour, but you have more work to do for that class than just actually showing up and being present. And so it's starting to work through those examples and plotting them literally on a visible calendar for students to see. And some want that each and every week going forward. Some, it just helps get the visualization of what that looks like, and figuring out you've got a finite number of hours in a week, and you can, use some of them for really fun things. And we want you to, right? College is going to be miserable if you're doing nothing but studying and sleeping, right? You need to do the fun things too. But if you don't do the schoolwork, then you're going to flunk out and not be able to do all the fun things that you want to do, right? So much of it is about balance and, helping that student be their best self, their healthy self, and figure out, what works best for them. We also don't get it right every time, often in the first go around, right? We might think, hey, going to the gym 3 days a week might be enough. And it might turn out that every day that student thrives on, spending half an hour on the treadmill or walking around campus. Then let's build that in every day, but something else has to give. That might mean instead of playing, Mario Kart 5 days a week, you only do it 3 days a week, right? Let's figure out how do we find that balance in helping support the student. And I know that probably seems fairly simple and straightforward and obvious, but it might not be for a student. And until you really start being intentional about how you plan, it's so easy. And I've done it. I'm sure you've done it, Brandon. Like, it's easy to let time slip away. And whether you're staring at your phone, you're playing a game, you doing whatever, you realize, oh no, I lost the time I had to study. What do I do now? And we try to avoid that crisis moment.
Yeah, the amount of students you and I talk to who say, I don't have any time. And we're like, you have 3 classes and a work study, right?
Yeah.
We both have families, and it's like, how do you not have time? But what you said is so valuable. There's a couple pieces that I want to just highlight. The first one is the visual, getting everything out onto paper for our students. I don't know about you, but it like clicks when they see it visually. Some people call it time blocking, the grid work, whatever that is. I think that's so impactful. And the other thing you said that I want to highlight is we don't get it right the first time. Like, organization systems, like, everyone has a different organization system. Everyone has a different planning system, and they change over time. And so I want to highlight both those because I think they're really important for families to hear that it's okay for this to be a work in progress.
Yeah. And it's important to know that, if your student has a roommate and their roommate has this planning system, that may or may not work for your actual child, right? Like, we've got students in our program that if you tell them, hey, next Thursday at 2:00, be here for a meeting, it's in their brain. They don't write it down, but they never forget it. And they're never late. They're great. We've got other students who they need it written down in 3 different places, and they need 4 alarms to remember. And they're probably going to need a reminder that day, right? So we've got all ends of that, if you will. And that's great. And minds work differently. And so try something. And if it seems to work over a couple weeks span, then great. If it seems to be failing after a couple of weeks of trying it, then move on to something different. And, we see that with our students, in that how one student plans and prepares and thinks is often quite different from their peer. And, you got to give it a little bit of a go, right? Don't change it after 2 days of trying it, right? You need a little bit of experience with it, but, you don't have to let it run for an entire semester before you reevaluate it either.
Yeah, one of the things that's so unique about your program is that towards the end of college, you help students look for jobs. And there's that component. And that ties in closely to what you talked about before with the advocacy piece. So whether it's interviewing for a job or talking to a professor, this advocacy piece is so important. How do you guys teach advocacy?
Yeah, it's tough. And, when I think of what are the common things that almost all of our students need support in, or, skills to develop, executive functioning is one, and self-advocacy is probably right there with it. It's tough, and many of our students come from a background where they've had challenges, whether that's academically, socially, they have felt as though they didn't fit in amongst their peers, or they were in a small classroom and so they didn't, interact with lots of other people. We see it all. And, college is a time of self-advocacy, especially for a student with a disability. You need to be advocating for yourself to get the proper supports that you need. You need to advocate for yourself to have, a break where you need a break. You need to advocate for yourself to maybe have some adjustments in the dining hall, right? You may need some dietary modifications that would help you thrive as a human being, right? Those are all fairly simple, examples of self-advocacy, yet they can be very, very difficult. And the more you practice those repetitions, the better. So one of the things we work closely with our students on is this idea of independence and self-sufficiency as a general concept, meaning we'll help you the first time figure out that support opportunity or get that accommodation, whatever it might be. But we want you taking the reins and doing that the next time. Because each and every time you do it, it's a feather in your cap. It's one more element of confidence that hopefully helps you when there's not that support person sitting right next to you to help you in that situation. And, some take to that and they thrive with it. Others, it takes a long time. And it's something we continue to work with them, all 4, maybe 5 years that they're with us. But we want to build it as a skill that they can take with them into the workplace. When you get into the workplace, some employers are really great and they're, going to put lots of support options right in front of you. The vast majority are not. They'll help when asked, but they're not going to knock on your door and say, hey, you know what? You look like you might need some support. Can we help you? Right? That's just not as common in the workplace, unfortunately, like you might see in a high school setting or even in some college settings. And so we want to get them to have those skills so that when that time comes, they feel comfortable, they feel confident asking for that support, asking for that modification. For a lot of neurodivergent, professionals, having a set of noise canceling headphones can fundamentally change their work capacity. It can truly improve their production output. That employee needs to say, I would work much better in this scenario if I had a set of noise canceling headphones. Is that something you would be willing to provide? And you'd be surprised how often it works, but you got to ask. And that's the self-advocacy piece we're constantly trying to teach.
That is a really good concrete example. What do you say to parents who are like, oh yeah, my kid just won't advocate? Like, I'm sure you have to get that pushback from time to time.
Yeah, we do. And that's tough. And, it again comes down to repetition, right? So can we start thinking of some small examples for your student to advocate? What are the basic examples that might be helpful for them? Is it something in the dining hall? Is it something in the fitness center? Is it something in a classroom, right? I might say to that student, who's your favorite professor? And they might say, Dr. Smith. Okay, let's have a repetition here where you go to Dr. Smith and you ask for something that supports you, right? And we do it with a friendly face. We do it in a way that we think Dr. Smith's probably going to respond favorably, build some confidence, and then ideally be in a place where they can go to the next professor who's maybe a little more intimidating or maybe a little less friendly to get that same level of accommodation support that they might need. So it comes down to repetition. It comes down to experience and learning from that. The other thing that we would do in our scenario is if we encourage that student to go talk to Dr. Smith, when they come back, we want to talk about it, right? Let's break it down. How'd it go? Well, what didn't go well, right? How did you feel after you got that answer? What did you feel, kind of confident after you got the yes? Did you worry about the response? Let's talk through that so the student has the experience and is able to kind of zoom out and look at it and see what that looks like. And then to some extent, we'll communicate that with the family if appropriate, right? And we'll make sure that they're reinforcing many of the same, kind of concepts, habits, patterns that we're trying to build. So that if they go home over Christmas break and they can, exhibit some of those same skills and developments in a, more personal setting, that's a good thing. That helps build some confidence, and that's what the student probably needs.
Yeah, that reflection piece that you guys do, I mean, that's just so valuable. So often we're like, go talk to your teacher, go talk to your professor, go talk to your coach, and then it's just gone, right? And there's never that time for reflection on whether we did it well or not. I love that. You spoke about planning, you spoke about time management. When we go from this, structure of high school and the home to more unstructured college campus, is there anything else that comes to mind from like an executive function perspective that you just see as a continual struggle?
Yeah, as silly as it sounds, I think sometimes taking care of the little things, when you're a high school student and family of a high school student preparing for that transition to college, the more of the little things you can take care of to hopefully have that not be a stressor when you get to college, the better. I often use laundry as an example, right? A lot of students don't do their laundry in high school. They're too busy. Parents like it done a certain way. Mom's worried that, student's going to break the washer and it's $1,000. Like, I get all that, right? However, if first week of college, in addition to the class, in addition to making friends, in addition to getting lost, in addition to the new food in the dining hall, that student's also worried about when am I going to wash my clothes and what if I don't know how to use the dryer? Like that doesn't help the scenario, right? So that's one silly example. But the more things you can think about and talk about with your student about the transition to college, what that means, you can certainly find examples, syllabi, a syllabus on the internet from a college class and talk through that with your student, right? Like that's a learning contract that a professor gives to a student. Some high schools use those, which is great. But at the college level, 8 out of 10 professors are going to live and die by that document. And they're going to expect you when they give it to you on day one of class that you follow that thing for the next 15 weeks, no matter what, right? And maybe they give you some reminders, but maybe they don't. So we talk a lot about understanding that that's an important piece to understand. And, you should probably make like 5 copies of it and scan it and, not lose that thing because it's a really important piece. So, as a family, you can practice that, right? You can practice going through a syllabus. You can talk about, okay, let's see, there's an exam on March 15th, Billy. When should you start studying for that exam? The answer is not March 14th, right? The answer is let's think about it a couple of days and let's plan that back out, right? So those are some of the things we work on with our students when they're here with us on campus. But if you have some experience and some, comfort with that, getting into it, that's great. And one of the things that we're seeing more and more of, we've been doing this for a long time at Mercyhurst, is having summer programs that intentionally help with the transition to college for neurodivergent students. And so, in one of our summer programs, students take an actual college class. So they get a college syllabus, they have assignments, they've got to do the work. in a supported setting with, a small class size, and it's only one class, but it's repetition. It's understanding that, the syllabus says the test is on this day. And so that test is probably going to be on that day. And the professor expects me to know that that's the case. And I need to do the prep work, accordingly. So the more repetition and, practice you can get with some of those little things. And again, I know that sounds obvious, but it's what makes a difference, right? If you can focus on the things you can control, right? Control the controllables. I'm a big fan of Stoicism and Ryan Holiday, like focus on the things you can control, because there's going to be surprises. There's going to be variables you don't expect in college. But if you've got those main things under control, all those unknowns and unexpected surprises are going to be less impactful, in our opinion.
That's a phenomenal viewpoint. And, you said I have a kind of silly example, laundry. From my experience, like doing laundry is more stressful for a lot of our students than classes, right? It's that little stuff like laundry, if the kid has a car, putting gas in the car, like the stuff we just do for our children all the time because we're moving fast and we're busy. That's the stuff that really eats them up.
Yeah. And, what we see too is sometimes a student learns to do laundry, but they know it on their machine, which might be a front loading washer with this buttons and that thing, right? And seeing a different machine can throw them all off, right? I mean, it's some of those little things. If you know that your student, thrives on patterns and repetition and things being a certain way, start introducing variables, right? Go to the neighbor's house and look at their washing machine. Go to your parents, stay in a hotel. And like literally, if you go on in a hotel, use the washing machine, right? Yeah, it might cost you $8, but it's a chance to try a washing machine that's totally different than the one that your student is used to, right? Again, those are silly examples, but college is full of surprises and unexpected variables and differences. And, food is another silly example, right? A lot of students eat the same 5 things over and over again. And their parents make those 5 things because they know they'll eat them. Bad news, those 5 things may not be available at college, right? And those students also may not know how to cook. So they're going to have to go into that dining hall and try new things. We take students on trips in our program, and we were taking a trip to Ireland back in May. And we had one of our students joining on this trip, and he was a fairly picky eater, and he ate the same 3 things all the time in our dining hall and was good with that. But we were reasonably confident those things would not be available everywhere we went throughout Ireland. And so, we worked with that family to talk about that and start thinking about that. So when that student went home on Christmas break, his family had him try fish and chips. And turns out he actually liked fish and chips. So when we went to Ireland, that student ate fish and chips almost every day. So the example. But again, it was thinking through the little things to avoid the big stressors and the unexpected moment. So when we were, thousands of miles away in a new culture, a new environment, he knew he could fall back to fish and chips as a meal that, that would be good for him.
That's why I love your program is because it's really the bridge, right? So if you have a student you are worried about, finding one of these bridge type programs with communication, I mean, it's just worth its weight in gold for so many of our kids. The word that I get more than any other word by far, not even close, like 10 to 1 every other word in college right now is procrastination. What do you guys do if you see a student frequently procrastinating?
Yeah, and I would say it's probably not if we see, it's when we see, right? I mean,
Fair.
I'm going to bet you do it as well, right? It's just, it's really hard not to do that.
Of course.
And it comes back to the planning. It comes back to task management and figuring out what your particular system is, figuring out reminders, if it's alarms, if it's, what works best for that individual student. So in our world, we meet with students regularly once a week for an hour. And in that meeting, we're going to talk about how things are going. Are we keeping up with tasks? And if we see that students continuing to slip from a task completion perspective, procrastinating, all those things, we're going to change it up, right? Let's think about a different system. Let's think about doing something on paper versus on the phone. Let's think about, setting a goal and then a reward, right? So let's say you really like playing certain games, or you really like, the smoothies at one of the on-campus eateries, right? Do the work, buy yourself a smoothie, right? Like set that trigger and reward type pattern. That works for some students, but not all. Procrastination is a real thing, and it's we're never going to beat it 100%, but we want to try and figure out, when is it happening? Is there something that's triggering that? Is it the big giant paper that you have to write that always leads to procrastination? So we try to talk through some of those things to see if we can get to the root of it, knowing we're not going to beat it, but how can we minimize it as best we possibly can? And helping our students understand that perfection is not our goal, right? It's going to happen. It's not worth, having a breakdown about if you see as though you're procrastinating on something, but where can we make progress? I use the phrase progress, not perfection, all the time with students I talk with their staff. Let's make progress on trying to curb the, procrastination, but, know it's going to be there. How can we help support that student to make progress?
When you ask a lot of these questions, have you found that your students are pretty self-aware of why they're procrastinating?
I think sometimes. I think we see, that they sometimes in our specific students' cases, I think the procrastination often, unfortunately, ties to self-advocacy challenges, right? So they'll get an assignment and they're just not sure how to do the assignment, or they'll get a project and they don't know where to start on the project, or, group work is, a real challenge for lots of neurodivergent students who have some social challenges, right? So they may be in a place where they're working on a group project. There's two other people on the team, and our student may not know what their role is. They may not understand the nuances of the project. They may not be able to grasp the instruction because they weren't super detailed, right? A lot of neurodivergent students tend to thrive when there are details present. And sometimes in that assignment, it's vague. Sometimes intentionally so, right? To make students work and figure it out. And so I think procrastination can often, be tied so closely to self-advocacy challenges, and not being comfortable raising your hand and saying, I don't understand, that the intended outcome of this project, or I don't understand this step of the assignment. And instead they just kind of procrastinate, and they just hope somebody else is going to ask that question, or they're going to hope there's more instruction. And I find that I do that quite often, in myself, right? I don't want to be the one to ask that hard question in a meeting. So I'm going to hope somebody else is going to ask that question, and then it doesn't get asked. And then that pushes everything back. And, so we work on building the skills to ask the question, right? If misunderstanding or lack of understanding that project is what's causing the procrastination, let's help that student, create the skills to be able to ask the question, so that that's not what's standing in their way.
I talk about procrastination about 8 hours a day, it feels like. And I always give my procrastination as emotional spiel, because there's a lot of research behind procrastination being emotional, not just behavioral. You are the first one I've talked to who just a huge light went on for me that procrastination is a self-advocacy challenge. I have never heard that. And that is so true.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and it's certainly not for all. I mean, some, they just, really don't want to do the thing that they don't want to do. And, that happens, right? But I think I certainly have seen it where, we do some project-based work with our students, where we're working with external clients where, they're doing real research for a cybersecurity company. And, I've seen where we've had students who, I know they don't understand the content, but I also know they're not comfortable raising their hand and being the one person in the group that says, I don't understand. Right. And that's a self-advocacy thing. And it's a procrastination thing, right? They're procrastinating, doing the hard thing, right? Raising their hand saying, I don't understand. And so I will have that conversation with the student afterwards in a more comfortable setting. And I'll say, do you really understand this? And then they'll say, no, not really. And then we talk about, well, why didn't you speak up? And you know what? If you're not comfortable speaking up in that meeting, you need to make it a point as soon as that meeting ends to contact myself or somebody else on the team to say, I didn't feel comfortable raising my hand, but I don't understand. Or even, after thinking about it more, I'm not sure I understand, right? How do we build that skills where if you can't do the big thing, the hard thing, let's think about what's the next best step, right? Do the next right thing to hopefully help you get back on track and try to proceed into, what's going to help you get to the solution point.
Yeah, that's a really high level insight. I have a lot to think about in my practice. Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. My last question for you is, we're both fathers. We love our kids so much, right? I'm sure you see this all the time, where parents of neurodivergent students send their kids off to college and they have a really hard time stepping back. And they're probably sending you a lot of emails and phone calls. How do you coach families through the transition?
Yeah, it's tough. And we see all sides of it. One of the biggest things I try to encourage families is, especially if you're using a program like ours that has a fee, or if you're using executive functioning coaching where you're paying for that service, right? Like, let the experts do their thing. That's hard. I get it, right? It's easy for me to say that, harder for you to adjust that, right? But it would be just as though if you had a son playing baseball and you hired a hitting coach to teach them how to hit, right? Let that coach teach. Don't stand there on the sidelines and offer your own critiques on elbow up and, let the coach do their thing. And that's what I encourage families to try and do, with a program like ours. Let us do our thing. It's very likely that your student is going to struggle, right? Few college students, neurodivergent, neurotypical alike, have a perfect college experience where they get 100% all the time and everything's gravy, right? Your student's probably going to struggle, and that's part of the process. And we're there to try and be a resource for when that happens, right? We're going to talk through it from an academic perspective. We're going to talk through it from an emotional perspective, come up with a plan on how to support that. But let us do our job and then figure out, are there ways that you can reinforce some of the things that we're building in their personal life? Ask your student, what things are you working on in that support meeting? And when they tell you, here's what we're working on, don't offer your own take on how to improve that, right? Let them do their thing. But think of what are some examples you can do over spring break to help reinforce that. Or when they come home for a month at Christmas, what are some of those things that they're working on that they can do, right? If they're doing pretty well, doing their own laundry while they're at campus, make them do it when they come home at Christmas break, right? Don't let it fall backwards. Let them reinforce some of those key skills. I think that's the biggest thing, right? Try and stay out of the way in terms of the peer coaching and support, but be someone who reinforces the key things that they're learning. it's not always going to be perfect. There's going to be times when you think you know better than a support person, whether that's an executive function coach or their, support coordinator. And if you need to have that conversation with the coach or the coordinator, do that instead of having it directly with your student. They're just going to get more confused if they've got 5 different teaching styles. I see this, you mentioned our kids, Brandon. I have, a son who plays baseball, and I'm always worried that 3 people are going to work with him in the span of half an hour on his swing, and they're all 3 going to move his elbow in a different spot, right? And he's not going to know what to do. Let's try and avoid that with our students, right? Let's let them, give them the keys that they need to succeed and let them try it. They're going to struggle at times. They're going to probably fail at times, but there's also a good chance they're going to grow because of it. And let's let the support system work its place.
Yeah, the hitting coach is a really good analogy, and they're going to struggle, and that's how we grow, right? And I don't know about your experience, but mine is when kids call their parents, they're usually not looking for advice. It's hard. They're just looking for some kind of love and support. They're not looking for how they can be better planners.
Yeah, I was just thinking of this as we were talking. I think it's great to have check-ins with your student as regularly as you see fit, right? I know we have students in our program that call their parents 2-3 times a day. That's great. And then I know we have some in our program who they don't call at all. Mom calls because the kid forgets to call, right? And that's okay. I'm not saying which is right or wrong, but maybe if you're in that parent situation and you really want to know how your student's doing, right? Maybe set yourself a goal or a rule. On Sundays, I'm going to ask questions about their planning or their procrastination or their grades. But, Tuesdays and Thursdays when we talk, I just want to hear how their day's going. I just want to ask what games they're playing. I want to know what they ate in the dining hall that day, right? Keep it light. Don't feel like every time they talk to their family, they're getting grilled about their progress, because that's overwhelming, right? And your average college student has a tremendous amount of stress on their plate just with all the things that are happening in college. They probably don't need added stress from the family unit, checking up on them all the time. Do it sometimes, but maybe, set yourself one day a week where that's the day I'm going to interrogate my kid. And the other days I'm going to let them tell me what they want to share.
Yeah. That's kind of the ultimate advice right there. Just they're probably seeking connection than anything else. Yep. Ryan, you do amazing work. Where can people learn more about you and about your program?
Yeah. So, easiest place is if you go to mercyhurst.edu/neurodiversity. We've got a lot of different support programs, dual enrollment, summer programming, all that kinds of stuff. We've got a podcast that we're just getting started. Brandon, you were great to be a guest on there. So, we're just trying to get word out about, our support program, obviously, but I'm always happy to talk with families about what options are out there. What do support programs tend to do and not do? We just want to help be a resource. We know there's thousands and thousands of neurodivergent high school students who aren't sure if they are ready for college, want to go to college, can succeed in college. And there's hundreds of support programs like ours out there that will help. And we just want to make sure people know that. So that's really what I'm all about.
Ryan, thank you for all you do. And thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Brandon. It was fun.
Thank you for joining us on the Executive Function for All podcast. If today's episode brought you any value, please rate us 5 stars and share it with someone who may benefit. And remember, every small step you take builds towards your success. For resources and guidance, visit untappedlearning.com. Keep growing, keep learning, and we'll see you next time.